This is Earthly Possessions, session 6. How do we move forward? All right. What are your reflections from you've just watched and you've binge watched this
I did. All of the
this
sessions.
series.
Yeah.
Did they flow as well as I thought they did in my mind?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
good.
very well. I took pretty good notes on the last
So what were your
two of them.
reflections now that it's fresh in your mind?
Several times you said this is radical, radical. You just used the word radical. And were you talking about Jesus's words? If we really did it today, it would be radical.
Uh, yes, and I also think it was radical then. I don't
But I
think,
don't think radical is the right word. It's not radical.
what is it?
It's what he wants, how he wants us to live.
From not from God's perspective, it's not radical, but I would say from
Human.
a human perspective, I mean, everything we're going to talk about today and next week is even not the norm for Western culture. Cleaning out your stuff is not the norm. You
But,
know,
but it was radical in the day.
what do you mean?
What Jesus was preaching in
Yeah,
the day was radical.
it was. I mean, that's the notion of the upside down kingdom. Now, and in some sense, when you get to the early church, were they already living in community, supporting one another? Probably, yes. I think there was already some extent of that. But I think that the idea of selling extra, like people were like, I have this plot of land that's doing nothing that, you know, I'm just going to sit on and pass down. And if there were needs in the church, now this is the difference we live in today and age. I mean, like, we in most of our Western churches, not that there isn't a fluctuation of income, but who knows what level of need was present there at the time. But the fact that the fact that the book of Acts and Luke records this sharing of possessions as an outcome of the arrival of the Spirit indicates, for me, the radical nature of the departure of the way society was living. I think for us to not embrace consumerism, to maybe to rebalance or reject wealth, or to deal with the concept of what, all of possessions, all the stuff we've been talking about, it is radical in the sense of most Americans, most Westerners don't do it. We just accept. In fact, we have more sophisticated systems of rationalization of why we have stuff and why it's okay and why we don't deal with it than
Right.
we do than saying, no, I'm going to do something. Like the solutions, some of them were like intentional community and where is it? Intentional community, minimalist focused lifestyles, sharing with others, focus on community, development of there are these things that right now in particular in our current culture that is fraught with anxiety and loneliness, depression, and as we'll hear about from this dopamine nation and an overstimulated chemical in our brain that is causing us what we experience in the moment as happiness, but in the long term we experience it as sadness. So I would say it's radical. Is it
What word
radical?
would you use?
Do you not
Yeah.
like the word radical?
Yeah,
Is
well,
that
yeah,
got
but
some bad
I
connotation?
Yeah.
maybe it does.
You don't like radical? You don't want to be a radical?
Seems like
Fanatic?
yes.
Yeah, I would
And so
say.
if we choose to live like Jesus would like us to live, if we could get through this culture of greed and pride,
Yeah.
then we would be living a life that would be pleasing to God because that's what he wants. It
Yes.
doesn't mean you're stepping into a radical. It means you're choosing to live a life that's
Yeah.
trying to be
I
holy.
think what he's
Yeah.
saying though, or what Jason was saying,
What's the definition of
has
radical?
been, well, we need to look it up and understand the
Okay.
definition. But he was using it to say that what Jesus was preaching and
Okay.
wanting then was radical, and it's even more radical. But I would take radical in the context to mean not conventional, not the norm, not
Okay.
typically accepted, not radical right or radical left.
Okay, maybe that's what I'm thinking.
Okay, because we hear
And
that
I think
so much.
I think fanatic, Like, I would never describe Jesus as a fanatic, and I would never describe Christians that I think are living out their faith well as fanatics. You know, Jesus freaks, maybe that's kind of fun, but but fanatical has this overabundance,
That's
or
what I'm
this
thinking of.
overextending. But radical, let me see here, radical. It says, especially of change or action related to or affecting the fundamental nature of something. So in this case, far-reaching or thorough. And so, forming an inherent or fundamental part of the nature of something, advocating or based on thorough or extreme progressive. Oh, here, that would be where you're supporting an extreme or progressive section of a political party is probably what you're pushing against too.
Okay.
I do think though, I mean, like I've often described what we do in the Hiker Center as radical hospitality. And that's why when people talk about Lake City or the trails, they say, oh, you know, someone was just telling me, oh, I was talking to the CDT people, and they were saying that he was just having a conversation in the office, and someone was like, and this is on the Continental Divide, not on the Colorado Trail. They were like, hey, I've heard we need to stop in Lake City. Why? And so there already is this something about our hospitality here. It's not a dinner. There are lots of havens and little places for people. It's the combined nature of what we're doing, and it's radical because I would say because it goes against the fundamental nature of what we understand it to be. In most towns, they probably turn a blind eye to a hiker. Whereas what I love, one of my favorite stories to tell in all of this is Lynn Hudgens, who, is, masculine degeneration, shouldn't be on the road. Last summer was like, I'm going out tonight looking for some hikers, like, and there were part of me's like, I don't know if they should be riding with her, but I just couldn't bear the thought of taking that away from her. But that's radical.
So did you choose the word radical?
I don't know. I mean, I just say words and sometimes they come out.
No, but
Probably, but I mean, I meant it more just in the above the normal, beyond the normal, challenging the normal. Glenda, I can't hear you. I think you're muted. You muted? Glenda, I can't hear you. You there?
I'm not muted. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay. It helps to have studied Latin because radical comes from the root word radix, which means root itself. It's what your foundation is, what you're based on. And if our foundation is in Christ and in serving him, then
Yeah.
that gives us our direction.
So my thing I looked up here says radical comes from the Latin word meaning root, and in its earliest uses it refers to roots of various kinds, first literal and then figurative. Because roots are the deepest part of a plant, radical came, and this is important, to describe things understood as fundamental or essential.
Oh, that didn't sound.
So that's
Doesn't sound so
interesting.
bad, right?
No.
So
Yeah, that's
so
like
you
almost Christian.
chose and use a word
I'm using it in
without-
two ways, maybe.
without even knowing
Without-
the more valid meaning to our
Yeah.
discussion here. That's
I
very
like-
interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Well, maybe we
Okay,
need
all
to
right.
do a words. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's
off
great.
track.
No, but I think but that's a response to and I do think the hospitality we offer in some, and maybe in both senses of the word of. So, what is the definition of the word? How does radical play into something that is, over and abundance? Like, what is do you know? I mean, like, where would I had it up here.
Oh, it's like.
Belong to the root of a
politics,
cord. I don't know. The person who advocates coming. I'll have to do some. We'll do some. Next week. I'll come back.
Okay, I didn't mean to take a rabbit
No,
trail.
that's okay. I mean, that's interesting. We'll come back to it. Yeah, but let me take a look at that because that is interesting because and I've always used radical. We use radical more in the sense of radical, but not in the sense of fanatic.
Well, you're going to be thinking
Okay.
about it now.
Yeah, I know, I am. I'm gonna-
It's
I've already
gonna
said it
cause you
too
to
many
have to go
times.
back to Princeton and,
I'm gonna have a deep dive in the word radical this week. Okay. Well, then, any other thoughts from the?
Yeah, just
Go ahead.
on that survey of what scripture says about this issue, having done, as you say, the deep dive, I was just really struck by how much the Bible says about our relationship with possessions and our wealth and things. I mean, when you do that, just focus on that. It's incredible. And we don't talk about that much. It's not what we focus on in our our emphasis,
Yeah.
on how to live as Christians. We don't talk about that.
Well, and in the history of civilization, this is a fairly new problem. In other words, although we're all, we're an intelligent culture as a whole, and actually,
Well, we've never had as much.
no, and that's, yeah, and we've talked about that. The
Yeah.
production, this overspent American sort of sets the stage for actually in the and sets the stage and explains how we got to kind of what we talked about in some of the first ones, but kind of wraps it up nicely in terms of and gives us suggestions on how we might come out of that. No, I felt the same way, Glenda. I was, as even studying it and but even teaching it, like I couldn't help but thinking like, when is enough is enough, and there's so much there. But I think and I'll emphasize this again and again, but I think it goes back to, again, not just possessions, not just, I think it goes back to racism. I think it goes back to the way we deal with others. And it'll tie into what we're talking about today, the overindulgence of our lives in this world is probably really what all of that is about. And when we begin to overindulge ourselves and value our own experience in the world, and we then hold it against someone else in a comparative or diminutive way, that's where we miss the whole picture of what we're trying to be, in other words, I think we can enjoy the pleasures. I think Ecclesiastes, Psalms, a lot of these things talk about us enjoying the lives and appreciating them, and then God, and every blessing comes from above. But that out of balance, going back to Augustine's golden means, that out of balance is problematic, and so anything out of balance needs to be brought. And that actually is the dopamine thing is really interesting, as I dug into that a little bit more. Okay, anything other comments from this past week's? Okay, Jim, you got anything you need to add?
No, sir.
All right.
I'm here. I'm listening.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so the first book, and really, and I'm just getting, if this is a book, you're welcome to borrow it. I've sort of skimmed through it. I pulled some stuff out of it. It's an easy read. It's an interesting read. I would say if someone finds himself in a place where they feel like they're spending just for the sake of spending, or they there requires some self-analysis, this comes about. I don't even remember when this was written. It was probably early 2010ish, maybe, but 2015. But it was around the time where there was lots of investigative journalism, like experience journalism. Like they would, it's like A.J. Jacobs, who spent a year, living through the Bible, or Omnivore's Dilemma, when Michael Pollan, the guy who did Food Inc., basically went to these different, went to a farm that did organic farming and natural, poultry, and was experiencing that. Went on a hunting and gathering trip. So it falls in the vein of experience journalism, and exploring a topic through experience journalism. But it's interesting. And what do I want to say about it? It addresses the in their own words, they're trying to address their preoccupation with money, which they perceive as being the value, an increased value, or an unregulated or value, or a desire for a greater sense of value of self. A preoccupation with money gives us opportunities, and those opportunities are often given by the fact that we have resources or money, and power. When we focus on money and the value of money, oftentimes in some sense it's to give us power. So they're naming these sort of base desire that we have in the both consumption of stuff. They and amongst many authors these days say anxiety is at the root of our love of stuff. This goes into that, the sociological effect of comparison, and not just of comparison with neighbor, but comparison. The argument they is that Score makes is that with the world, we went from trying to keep up with the Joneses to trying to keep up with, and I would argue it's not just with material possessions these days. It's also with experiences as badges. Millennials do this all over Instagram. It's kind of like when you take a picture of your food, you're trying to say, look what I'm eating, look how special I am, look how good my food is, look how, and there's all sorts of comics that make fun of this, of taking a picture of your food, like when in the world, you go back 50 years when a photograph costed you $1 to develop, no one in the right mind would have ever taken the picture
Yeah,
of,
except for
a journal,
Gourmet
yeah,
magazine.
yeah, but then we put these on. I mean, it's kind of like, Facebook is just, for a while that was the norm. You just food picture, and people still do it, but I think we've mocked it enough that they,
Now, with this book,
yeah,
a
and
year
you can borrow it
without-
if you
No,
want.
that's okay. A year without a purchase, that's a year, I mean, you're gonna make purchases, but it's talking about purchasing things that you really don't need.
So I'll give you the
Just
rules.
a shopping,
Let-
just to shop.
Just in the way, and it's real, and if you're interested, it's worth reading. But I mean, and if you're not in a purchasing pattern, it
I'm
probably
not.
but it's interesting to
that's-
see their journey.
I think that's with growing older and a tight budget, you learn, you do.
Yeah,
you
yeah, I mean,
discipline.
yeah. No, I think that's probably true. They say, don't get. It's not about the book is not about money. Don't get me wrong. Money is important. Money is what drives our economy. Money allows us to buy our basic needs and survive. But it goes deeper than that. A preoccupation with money is synonymous for something larger lurking beneath the surface. What is it that fuels our desires for money and the material goods it can provide? Why do we choose to struggle for more when simplifying would be so much easier? And what have we lost in the process? That's what this book is about. I wrote it to try to answer these questions and more. It is written for the disconnected, the stressed out, the anxious. And I think that that's accurate. Like I think, and this ultimately, what this I'm presenting for you, this is a solution. And this ties into this in the sense of it's a reset. And I'll go into when I go into Dopamine Nation, it gives us the psychological rationale for why we need to basically fast, why we need to abstain, because there's a equilibrium that gets out of balance. But so these were the rules. Is that when it comes to rules, we kept it simple. We know that a shorter list will be easy to remember and adhere to day by day. So we settled on the following list and agreed to modify it if we run into any glaring omissions. So they said, we can buy stuff that can be used up within a year. Groceries, gas, hygiene products, but no clothing. We have plenty of those. If there truly is a need, for example, not a single pair of our kids' shoes fit without causing irreversible toe damage, we'll find usable hand-me-downs. So that's one. They can buy stuff that they can use. So necessities are, and that doesn't mean they change their lifestyle. It doesn't mean they're eating, yeah. I mean, they're not living in poverty. They're really addressing the issue of the need to consume. We fix stuff that breaks unless the repair cost is greater than the replacement cost, or unless its suitable replacement already exists in our home. So I think the idea is, and interestingly enough, just to say that, me cleaning out my mom's house, the amount of things that I found that were broken that had been replaced, but then the broken thing was still kept, is also an interesting thing. I just got I bought a new pair of hiking boots when I moved here way back 4 years ago, and they finally ran their course. Although, even though I think 4 years is probably reasonable to get out of a pair of hiking boots, they were still disappointed. But there was this almost, well, I should save these in case there's something messy. And then I said, no, I just got to the point where I was like, no, there's a hole in the bottom of them.
Right.
Why am I
No,
saving them?
yeah,
Just
we
get rid
all
of
do
them.
that.
If you've worn your shoe through to a hole, that's kind of I strive to do that, but I don't always.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So yeah, and it was liberating too.
Just because.
Just in case. Yeah. I mean, you know what? I found a bath mat in my mom's house that was literally, you could lift it up and see through parts of it that I remember from when I was a child, like 7, 8 years old.
Oh, gosh.
Wow.
And so there, but I also think that was
just don't
that was a
surround you with-
depression mentality that came with it. And my
exactly.
father's from the Philippines, so that would probably contribute. Okay, gifts must be in the form of charitable donation or gift experiences. In other words, and it says the idea is to build connections and memories by doing so, such as going to dinner together, visiting the zoo, or traveling to visit friends and family. So this is not a radical approach. This is a pulling back, because I mean, charitable donations, if you're going to give a gift, would be like, Marcia, happy birthday, I'm going to give you a gift by donating $100 to this or something like that. But I think the idea, I mean, like if you're going to dinner together, visiting a zoo, they're still living life. They're still experiencing. They're just, and the important thing to note is that they're not, they're what they're doing is saying we're going to buy and consume the things that we need. And with the extra money beyond the things that we need, we're going to spend that and put that towards giving to others and experiencing and developing and building relationships with those we love, which I think just is fairly common sense. But but sometimes those things are a little harder to do, and they don't give you the same rush.
The dopamine.
The dopamine
Yeah,
rush.
that's the dangerous one.
Yeah, no, seriously. So the results of this, when you look back, I don't know if I dog-eared that, but I did put 241. The result of it was threefold for them. I'll come back and read that. The result of it was threefold. One, they said that as they reflected back on the year, and this was just 1 year, they found that they had more energy for things that matter. Just the removal of the need to purchase, the looking for purchase, the building of the desire, the disappointment, all of the whole cycle of the purchasing and consumption side of it removed, and it gave them more energy in life, more and we'll look in the dopamine nation why that is the case, and why you think that buying more theoretically leads to happiness, but ultimately it doesn't. Is really interesting when you get into the brain, into the neurology of the way your brain functions. But two, it left more money for the things that matter. They found themselves, by not spending on things that didn't matter, they had more time to spend on things that did. And that would be their experiences, naturally. A deeper understanding of the things that matter, because they spent more time and focus on the things that matter. It goes back to the cork thing, the things you focus on, the things that matter. What I thought was interesting, though, is, and then this is the last thing I'll say about this, it's a great little read. It would take you not very much time to sort of skim through it. He's talking. He ends the book with a story that I thought was fascinating. To be honest with you, I kind of doubt that it's true, but there's part of me that does. But so they didn't spend a lot for a year, and then he said he got a text one night. He was up doing something, and he got it said the text is from a number I didn't know, and it read bank alert, suspicious activity, along with a toll-free number. He was concerned, and so he calls and verifies the bank, and then he calls and said, what's going on? And they say, our record shows a number of transactions this evening that are inconsistent with your normal purchasing patterns. And he continues talking, and he said, I'm stuck on the phrase normal purchasing patterns. Then it hits me, and I interrupted Brandon mid-sentence. Brandon, it's a long story, but I'm guessing this has something to do with the fact that my wife and I have not spent for the last year. And so basically what happened was, when they came out of this year, they spent something, and their credit card company,
Had a fib.
yes. And he says, let me guess. He said, were the charges from the Opry Mill outlet in Nashville? And Brandon sounds surprised. He says, yes, as a matter of fact, it was 2 different stores, actually, the children's clothing and another store. And I guess I'm not the only one. Thanks for checking up on us. He said, I pushed the little red button to end the call. And then I thought to myself, inconsistent with normal purchasing patterns.
Wow.
And so what you see in a year's, we're talking about, this is a book about a year that people didn't spend anything for a year.
Without purchasing.
And
Man, I don't know what Home Depot's gonna do when I get through remodeling the house.
But see, if you're remodeling, I would think they would argue that you're in the process of doing it, and it probably wouldn't be the good time to do that.
I know,
But
but I'm just talking about my patterns.
yeah. Oh yeah, but that's what I'm saying but that whole notion of credit cards monitor our patterns of spending and our
Right.
source of spending, and what does
They
that?
also do it for fraud.
Well, they do, yeah, they do. Oh yeah, they're primarily doing fraud to protect themselves. But I'm sure they're not analyzing it in their, and no, they're not in the same way. I mean, they may sell information, I don't know, but
They are.
probably to some
For
extent.
sure.
I don't know. We all check boxes and click yes to things that we probably shouldn't. But so great book. If you're interested in it, you're welcome to borrow it. Okay, next one is Dopamine Nation. Fascinating, fascinating read. And I'm going to see if I can get through this. There are 7 points from it, but the introduction is this. Anna Lemke, I guess, and she's a medical doctor. She basically looks at how dopamine factors into our neurology by the way we live our lives and the way we spend and our consumption and our seeking of pleasure and pain. She said that 100 years ago, for example, having a few hits of dopamine a day, in terms of your body releasing these micro dopamine hits, would be something that would be fairly normal, just like one or two. And now we're in a day where we're seeking out we have like hundreds of them. So just think from that idea alone that, and obviously it's different for everyone, but to go from a couple hits of dopamine in our psychology and our brain and our neurology, all that's going on, just, in measure to the place where we are, every time you play an app and you connect, your game app, and you connect all of your jewels, and it creates a big, I don't even play them. So, or what, it does an effect, and we get a little excited. What'd you say? Jim does?
Solitary.
Solitaire.
Yeah, when you get that run and you're like, oh, and you get excited.
Yeah.
So that's what she's exploring. Now, here's what's interesting. Her argument behind all of this is, actually, I want to read you here. This sums it up. This book is about pleasure. It is also about pain. Most important, it's about the relationship between pleasure and pain, and how understanding that relationship has become essential for a well-lived life. Jumping ahead, I'll read that later. This relationship between pain and pleasure is something that is a part of our understanding of philosophy, going back to the very early time. You avoid pain, you seek out pleasure. But what the neurology has taught us is that the pain and pleasure are felt in the same part of your brain, and they're experienced in the same part of your brain, and your brain actually tries to regulate between the two. Your brain is designed to have an equilibrium between the notions of pain and pleasure, and if you seek pleasure out too much, your brain, then there's a reversal effect that brings you back to some pain. And you say, well, what does that mean? Does it have to be necessarily depression, but take the excitement of a roller coaster. And there's a lot of, maybe there's pleasure, maybe you associate that with pain, though. It could be reverse. And then if it's you associate with pain, the counterbalance of your brain is when you get down is your body releases endorphins and dopamine to say it's okay because you're safe. But the other side of that, for adrenaline junkies, are up there and they're roaring around again, and they come down and they're excited and they're sitting there and they're talking about that turn, and then all of a sudden there's a deficit in them, and they want, let's go again. Let's get in line again. Let's wait 2 hours so we can have this elated moment of pleasure, but then inevitably pain comes from that.
What's the difference between, what'd you just say a second, dopamine and adrenaline?
Adrenaline is what your body produces to protect itself, and it's sort of an elevation. And dopamine is a part of your brain's pleasure function, and it gives you a sense of euphoria, of peace, of happiness, but just in micro doses.
Because when I got back from Vietnam, I was always seeking some sort of adrenaline bone.
Well, that's probably because your patterns your brain in a, and it wasn't just it probably was a number of other chemicals going in your brain too. But again, and this talks about this that idea that we basically get so used to a pattern of behavior, and this is what dopamination ultimately argues is that that we seek out dopamine so much that we're almost dooming ourselves to a cycle of having that equilibrium balance itself towards pain. Dopamine is described as the universal currency for measuring addictive potential. So we get a dopamine hit or we get the feel good feeling, and that our return to that is something that we can actually understand.
Is it like somehow related to a sugar rush?
Yeah.
You know, like you get sugar,
Yeah, absolutely.
and then you have like a
dive,
Ooh.
yeah.
Yeah.
Pleasure, pain. It's the same thing with any drug high for that matter. I mean, it's that balance. Your body, well, and we'll talk about that. A shower, a cold shower. You jump into a cold shower, pain. But
Will
for
not
those
jump
who,
into a shower.
what's that?
I will not jump into a cold shower.
But for those who do it, she talks about that. There's this period of struggling through pain and then the pleasure. Your brain actually will turn itself towards pleasure, but we often don't give ourselves time within the pain for the pleasure to arrive.
Like that, what's her name in the river?
Yes,
In the winter.
Lana.
Yes.
Jumping in the river.
That crazy lady.
Well, Dan Ply's grandson, who is a Navy SEAL, stopped by this afternoon, and we were talking, and he said that he needed to come and spend a couple weeks in Lake City to come
Decompress.
down to decompress because he, been
Yeah.
on a mission.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, no, and that's part, yeah, it is. And it's your brain wants to bounce and it seeks it out. She defines wanting, or in the terms of the neurology, our desire of want, or, desires, is when we tip our balance towards pain. So consider that for a moment, and consider that in relationship to our purchasing and our need to have stuff and our belonging and our affection for stuff. The idea of getting rid of stuff causes pain. Why? Because we want. The idea of seeing something that we want that we don't have, it creates a desire, and that's pain. There's an absence in my life. So for those of you who don't know, I just had a birthday this past weekend. And I have been like restricting over myself over the last year in terms of my own game purchasing. But I was like, but then there was a sense of like, okay, it's my birthday. I'm gonna, maybe there's a game that I haven't, that I've wanted for a long time. So you start, but what happened was, and then I start looking and I start to find this game, and I start developing this sense of absence of want. I didn't have it before that. I allowed myself to have this sort of space for one. I'm like, I can spend $50 on a game. It's my birthday, whatever. There's not a whole lot that I want in life. And it's a game that I'll probably play with Silas, and a lot of good will come out of it. So then I start looking, and I couldn't find it brand new, so I'm looking for it used, and I realize it's So then I go through the process, and I'm emailing people trying to find it, and it becomes this want and the desire. It's a dungeon crawler, that I think Silas will like, and it's from a publisher that I like, but I don't need it. I don't know if I'll ever play it. But within the context of this, I developed a desire to want it, and then I purchased it, and I was like, yes, I found it. I got a good price on it. I'm excited. It's going to be here. And then I've spent the last week waiting, and I still, and that wants to, and I don't have the satisfaction of having it. But there's a knowledge in me that says, when I open it up, I'm going to look at it. I'm going to explore the parts. I'm going to read some of the rules. I'm going to look at the pieces. I'm going to show Silas. We're going to lay it out for the table. We might not even play it. And I'll get a rush through this whole process of doing that. And then, like many games, I'll pack it back up. I'll put it in its box. I'll put it on a shelf because I'm hoping to play it someday, and I won't come back to it. And in some sense, in some sick, demented sense, the rush that I wanted to get from the game came from from fulfilling that pain, from pushing that from meeting that want, from meeting that desire. That's the pain. That's the balance of pleasure. It's not even the game itself. It's just, and so you're avoiding that pain, and your brain's going like this.
You're a game collector. You added it to your collection.
Yeah, I know, but I'm trying to get rid of games right now. I'm trying to, like, I got a stack over in the game room or game library. I'm just like, these are all got to go because it's just too much.
Oh, we just can't,
So-
we just love to tell people about our minister and all the games he plays.
So-
But I could get rid of 100 of them and it
Yes,
wouldn't make a
well-
difference. You wouldn't even know.
So- I don't want to. I don't want to digress our conversation.
I'll pull it back if you do.
Mosley, what's his name?
Michael Mosley.
Michael
Yeah.
Mosley. Is he still doing the game thing?
No, he's moved to Hawaii. He's found out his girlfriend lives in Hawaii, so he's
Okay,
moving
all right.
there.
Oh, wow.
That's a whole nother story.
Okay.
Yeah, we won't get into that.
So maybe you should get a circular saw because
No.
maybe or a saw of some type, some sort of power tool. Because then you'd be like you'd have the adrenaline rush.
But I don't need
and the
one
dopamine rush
because
every
you have
time use it,
9.
and-
Yeah, he doesn't need one.
My rush will come when I come in under the cloak of night and get that one saw that you don't want me to have.
Well, and if you can't find the one at Roy's house, just come over to our garage, because we'll have 9 on.
Well, it's kind of like how many, but this goes back to anything that we have multiples of.
Yes, how many do you need?
You know, it's like,
Tools
Yard
are,
do we
yeah,
have?
tools don't count.
but tools don't count. But you know
That's the
what?
way I feel. About it.
John
Oh, there you go.
and John Bonner and Ron Bruce
We
would
all
say
have
that
our
guns
things.
don't count.
Yeah, right.
And shoes don't count.
And shoes don't. Yeah,
Oh my
Oh
God.
my God.
because every single one of those, the purchase of additional ones have a psychological pleasure associated with them that we're meeting. And what Dopamine Nation really is seeking to uncover is that's an addiction.
Yeah.
And it's seeking to say, if you can understand why your brain, can you lean back a little, or just I just want to see your wife's lovely
Okay.
face. I mean, I'd much rather look at her than you anyway. There you go. Just you
I
lean
understand
that
that.
way, and I know I just don't want to. I want to be able to see her as well. But your face is also lovely.
Thank
Um,
you.
anyway,
Hurt, and so I needed the dopamine punch, so I'm gonna order a tool when I get back to the house.
yeah.
Well, but
Uh,
you're gonna have a use for it.
Linda,
Yeah.
Yes, how does dopamine play into the common reaction that people have? They want something, they really want it, and they keep thinking about it, and they finally buy it. And then there's that letdown. How does that relate to the dopamine?
Because
Because
that
once
is-
they're not happy.
because
with
you're, and this is where the neurology comes in, and she goes into much greater detail. But the most basic way to say it is your brain is designed to regulate toward the equilibrium. And the more you seek out pleasure, the more it is going to send you back toward, the more pain you're going to experience because you're constantly seeking to have pleasure and pulling you back. This goes back to the idea of discipline. When people, like a runner's high, people discipline themselves, they push themselves through something hard, and there's pleasure. I don't know, there was a bunch of examples. Pleasure on the other side of that. So exercise was one of the biggest things. It hurts, it's painful, but at the end, and you feel, even though you're sore, you're like, I feel good. Like I did something that was good for me. Cold and heat exposure. You go out into the cold, and actually it's kind of the idea that your body warms itself. They say you go into hot countries, they drink hot tea because it actually cools them internally. It's the kind of, your body is seeking some sense of equilibrium balance. She goes on to say that actually telling the truth, being truth teller, is another form of equilibrium because we live in such a place where we're all diluting one another and we're all miscommunicating. And so that idea, of being truthful is a balancing act that probably releases endorphins, but kind of finds its balance. I mean, you think about how the facade that we have on social media these days,
Mhm.
even for us, and as much as I've posted pictures of when we went on hikes of beautiful scenes, there's someone sitting in their living room that sees that and is like, oh, I don't get to see that, or not that they couldn't, but they don't. And again, we're all sort of in this, in particular in the world that we're in, where we're just promoting this sense of idealism in whatever we do, but it's always and often to the detriment of others, which gets into the overspent American, that sense of keeping up with the Joneses. for for Lemke, she said managing the key to all of this is managing our compulsive overconsumption and finding a sense of balance, and that comes through discipline. And I think that ties right into the biblical message of not indulging in too much in this world, keeping a sense of balance. And I think as a Christian that comes in particular, because then it's like, if my identity, if you take Christianity or take faith or anything like that out of the picture, then it's just the equilibrium. Regardless, the equilibrium is finding that sense of balance is going to be important regardless. But then when you put the overlay of who we are in Christ and who we're called to be as Christians, this is not our world, that puts another level of seriousness or gravity around finding balance, because our overindulgence in this world is problematic, because it throws out of balance our sense of earthly, and that's why it says, Paul says, all things in moderation. The Bible doesn't say don't drink. The Bible says don't be drunk. And you can play this out. And this is the sense of the Sabbath. In fact, God gave the Israelites a seventh day of rest to provide some sense of balance. To otherwise, it's nonstop. If there's no Sabbath, there's no, and we take it for granted, if there's no concept of that idea of rest, and we say, oh, well, sure we can, as we live in the modern day. But if you go back, to 1,000 years and you were in an agrarian society, every second of your summer would be spent concerned with how do you have enough food to survive through the winter. And in essence, what God did in the Sabbath is says, for one day a week, you put your trust in me, and I'm going to care for you, and I want you to experience that sense of balance in your life. And I think that in that sense of that takes away some of that anxiety, because you're trusting in something larger than yourself. She is combining the science of desire with the wisdom of recovery, because she is talking about an addiction to dopamine. And that comes in and actually goes through a bunch of vices through the whole thing that she addresses. And so you can kind of cherry pick a chapter if you want. I don't know well, you can look at it. I don't know what's somewhere in here. But it goes through this big list of, basically chapters are lists of the things that we indulge in, and how to overcome those addictions. She defines addiction as being caused by is pain avoidance. So why does someone drink? Or why does someone seek out pornography? Or why does someone shop? Because there's pain in not, that wanting, that desire is there. And it leaves this sense of, I'm missing something. And so addiction keeping the continual coming back to something, whether it's to numb oneself, to gratify oneself, or there is some sense of you're avoiding that feeling of want and pain because it's uncomfortable. The second, or really the first cause, she said, is product availability, though. She thinks that much of the addictions that we experience, not that addictions are far more widespread and diverse, and they're far more prevalent than they were 200 years ago. There's more to be addicted to.
You don't have to wait to go to Grand Junction to buy something anymore. You jump on the phone.
Yeah, and you don't have to wait for the shipping
Well,
like I am right
you're
now.
also being marketed to. You're also being, and we've already talked about this a whole lot. The level of the marketing and the creation of desire, and it's
Yeah, my son's a marketing
Yep.
vice president, and I'm telling you, it's
Yeah.
you could we've been talking about something, just talking about it, whatever it was. I can't remember what it had something to do with the house. We were just talking about it. We didn't get on the internet and do a search or anything. We just were talking about it. Next thing you know, my phone pops up with that exact
They're
thing.
listening to you.
Oh yeah, they're always listening. Well, but they're trying to meet those needs because they can get you on the device and get you, and then you start to see that as a source of, again, defining the information. But it used to be that you had to go to the, if you wanted to find something, you had to go to the library, or you had to go some other source. So this pain and pleasure balance that she's talking about, she said the body creates basically the reverse of pain or pleasure to balance your own cognitive expression or a conscious desire to express one of those. But the brain develops a tolerance to pleasure. And it's the idea that purchasing something loses its power, and you do it again to get that same hit, but it always returns you to pain. And you end up getting stuck in pain, and it's there's a term, it's called anhedonia, meaning hedonistic, like hedo, and it's characterized by a reduced motivation. So think about the depression that people experience in our, so reduced motivation, reduced anticipatory pleasure, meaning wanting, the desire for something, or the want, the anticipating that is reduced by that. A reduced consumatory pleasure, and that is that our satisfaction with the very thing that we think we're going to get pleasure from is reduced. So as that, it's a diminishing of law, and the law of diminishing return. You return back, but every time you return back, your sense of desire, your sense of wanting, your sense of liking is diminished. And ultimately it creates a deficiency in reinforcement learning. So you become numb to the point of pleasure, that you're always seeking more. And when you put that into the terms of consuming or collecting, I am getting a game called Vast that I'm going to look at sometime later this week, and I may not play it now. I will probably eventually play it, but the sense of all of my week long and a week and a half long leading up to this whole notion of buying this game leads me to a place that ultimately I'm going to feel like bad almost about it. And probably will. I'll feel bad about the fact that I, indulge in purchasing. I'll feel bad the fact that it's sitting on the shelf and not playing it, whatever. But the whole point of that is that your brain is going to counterbalance, and so if we don't find some sense of balance in that, we're gonna lead to a place where we actually feel like we experience sadness.
Jason?
Yeah, Jim.
Uh, that is a common experience, that you acquire something that you think is going to bring you happiness, but it never does. Why do we keep doing it? Why doesn't the human spirit learn that it isn't going to do that? We just keep repeating that pattern for years and years and years.
I think, well, my off the cuff answer was because we have our eyes on this earth rather than on things that are above us.
Good point.
And that'll come in, and when you talk about the comparison side of that and the psychology that leads to how we reverse that, I think as Westerners, we see if we can recognize the problem or the source of the solution, we can then begin to address it. Yeah, go on.
So she had made it interesting of it. We buy things that don't bring us happiness. So are you saying
They do in the moment, in the
well,
pursuit,
but
in the
so there's the thing and the purpose for the thing. Now, I guess sometimes there are no purposes for the things you purchase. You just purchase to purchase. But then there is the bigger picture of just the amount of stuff, and there are certain people who let that stuff become their God, let it become more important than other things. So I get, as she said that, I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't know that I can't think of too many things that I've bought that I was not happy with. And
so
maybe just get to a point where I'm not going to use it or do that.
But let's go.
Anymore.
Since we're using games as my example and
Yeah,
saws
games are
as
great,
yours,
yeah.
at some point you have 8 other saws that you felt dissatisfaction with that you went out and bought another.
No.
No.
I'm not dissatisfied with any of them. They all have slightly different purposes, and sometimes those.
Where's my
purposes,
thing about rationalization in here?
Well, no. And I spend a lot of time rationalizing every purchase.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to tools.
Yeah.
Sometimes years.
Yeah. That.
And but the saws, some of them I acquired, I
Yeah.
inherited.
No, yeah, I'm no, I'm just
Some
kidding.
of them were rationalized because of location.
Yeah.
I had a workshop down in Texas.
Yeah.
I had one here, and then I moved it, and they came together. So yeah. Now, do I have too much stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, we all do.
There's been stuff I've kept that it's like I got to get rid of that, and somewhere in all this, and I mentioned it to you, is my 1 year rule.
Yeah.
Which is if I haven't used something in the last year, and I'm pretty sure I'm not going to use it in the next year,
You should get rid of it.
I need to get rid of it. Now, lots of exceptions apply. Tools. It's a tool I can use it to fix or make or
Yeah.
do or something in the future. Probably not likely to be gotten rid of. I mean, just 2 days ago, I had a neighbor come over, and he had this saw, this limb saw, and there was a tiny little screw in there, and he had an Allen wrench, and he says, "I can't tighten this up. Do you have an Allen wrench that'll fit this?" And I looked at it and I go, it's not an Allen wrench. It's a Torx. Well, let's go see if we can fix that. So we go in, and I start going through my smorgasbord of bits, torque bits. It was a T9. Do you have a T9? 15s, 20s, and
Thanks, I'll
25s
bet
are
we do
common.
by within the next
Go.
hour.
So I had bought this little kit of micro bits
Yeah.
6, 7, 8 years ago.
And your point,
and
Joe, is
I
what?
still had it. I kept it, and I couldn't have helped him if I
That's
hadn't
why
kept
people
that.
don't
thing.
Okay, I want
Get it
so hold on to what you're doing right now, just for 1 second.
Okay. all
Okay,
right.
we're gonna come back to that. Yeah.
Is Satan playing a role in any of this?
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. Because
That's what I was
anything, because I think that anything that seeks to draw us away
Right.
from the godly spirit mindset is not, I think we focus on the idea of sin being an action rather than sin being a category. Like we are sinful beings. It is our default disposition. When we focus on ourselves over and against others, we're living in our sinful selves over and against our spiritual selves. So it doesn't have to be an act. So yes, anything that distracts or pulls us away or takes us off of our eyes of what we actually believe, if we truly believe if we truly believe in an afterlife and redeemed, so yes, to some extent. I mean, to the full extent. So let's go into what she argues is the only way to reverse this imbalance that comes in our pain and pleasure dopamine relationship is abstinence.
Like alcohol.
Alcohol abstinence, sex abstinence, purchasing abstinence of the book, We're Without a Purchase, they reset. And because what happens in that is it literally, your brain, it goes from these extremes, and when you fast, it recenters itself, and then you find that greater sense of balance here as opposed to here and then balance, and flip-flopping back and forth. There are two types of interactions with the way this happens. There are those who seek pleasure first and then pain. And so those would be the people who are drinking, perhaps, because then pain comes after that. The down, you have up, you go down. And the vast majority of the people are in Western mindsets are geared towards pleasure first, pain comes after, which is why we live in a place where our country or our society is fraught with depression and sadness and loneliness. But some people seek pain, and then because they know that cognitively know that pleasure will coming about, and she found that that rewiring or that reframing, saying if I can endure some pain, that there will be satisfaction or pleasure on the other side, is actually a good thing. And she found that it was produced by resisting pain even for a few seconds,
Like example.
like a cold shower
Oh.
or even a cool shower.
Don't like that
or-
one, so come up with another.
Or how about reversing that? It's kind of,
A little pain of
if you're
exercise.
cold and you get into a warm bed, or you get into your bed at night and it's cold because it's been sitting there and it's just the temperature of the room. That initial is a shock. You're cold. Maybe, you don't like it. You're like, why isn't it warmer in here? if you push through that, it's your body starts to warm the covers. You start to feel cozy. You start to feel enough so that you sleep through the whole night, and
It's
you
not
sleep
really
comfortably
a
through that.
cognitive thought, though. You got to go to bed because you're super tired.
Well, that's yes, but it could. Well, exercise would be probably the easiest thing to do. Is on the other side of that, if you when you exercise and then you have that pain and then you have that feeling of feeling good, or when you've just or when you've disciplined yourselves. And I'm not going. They said they're not going to spend purchasing. There probably is a reset of pleasure on the other side of the knowledge of doing something that you know you ought to do. And I would argue that there is a spiritual side of that too that is reinforcing that when we do something that denies ourselves and gives to the other, it's kind of like, the notion of serving, you always receive something in that.
Mhm.
And strangely enough, and yes, there is something legitimately called compassion, burnout, compassionate burnout, where you just give, and you get to the point where you're like, I've got nothing left to give. While that is a very real thing, the reason people volunteer, the reason people live lives of service, are because there is a residual effect and it's not this extreme pleasure, but it's and again, it goes in this little section here. Pain and pleasure balanced here is in the middle. Pain and pleasure reaching out here is not. And you seeking, and the farther you go out here, the more you seek the extreme pleasures, but then the farther you have to drop from those pleasures, if you want to think about it in that way. She's in the example, she exercise, cold and heat exposure, telling the truth. Compulsive overconsumption of high dopamine goods experiences leads to isolation, indifference, broken relationships, and fragmented relationships with people. And you say, why is that? It's because I would argue from a spiritual perspective, because typically, if you're seeking that sense of that dopamine rush, it is a self-fulfilling endeavor. And anytime we're constantly focused on ourselves or seek out our own against the other, then we find ourselves at a loss. And I think even as spiritual beings, we experience spiritually deeper, because if we know and we understand that's a spirit convicting us and saying, no, self-giving is what I'm calling you to, not self-serving. And she believes honesty is the key to recovery. It prevents the denial, justification, rationalization. This is what I'm talking about. So this is where we have to take it. And so I don't know about your saws. I know about I have wrestled with I've never really collected anything in my life other than games, and I'm wrestling with that. I rationalized my keeping of the games, and this is where I'm going again with Roy, what you're saying. I put it back on me though. I rationalized my keeping of my 500 game plus game collection by opening it up to the community and running game nights. Is that a rationalization? Is that still necessary? There are games up there that I will never play, that no one will ever play. And then I'm like, well, should I just give them away? Well, then I guess send someone else to shelf. If I knew someone was going to play them, I would be happy. But then it's kind of like I'm possessing, I'm meddling with that. And that's not to say, again, that having games that are open and available, but it's that sense of allowing the very earthly thing that we have in front of us to have an imbalanced affection for it, if you will. I don't know if I said that well.
Well, so I don't want to take this down a rabbit hole, but what does Christ or the Bible say about the value of games? And not just your games,
No.
sports games, every game. I mean, I spent
Leisure. Play.
decades racing sailboats. Not big ones, little ones.
Yeah.
All over
Fun,
the country,
yeah.
and it's what I did, and it's still very much in my DNA. Although I'm not practicing, I kind of want to get back into it. But that's a game, and
Yeah,
golf
it's
is a
leisure.
game.
It's play, it's leisure, it's
And
yes.
then there's these things that we want to believe are sports, and they kind of are, but they're really not. They're spectacles.
Well, but it's still, and that's why I'm saying I think there's play and there's leisure. And so the brief word I'll say on play, because and we can talk more about it another time, but because I've addressed it before.
Yeah.
Play, I believe, is something that is a part of our image of God in us. play, both in the sense of engagement and the sense of, I think it's a part of the capacity. Not that animals don't play; they think they play, but animals play, and we name it as play, and they are playing, but they're practicing.
Learning.
Right.
They're learning. They're practicing skills. They're animals aren't just like, hey, even fetching a ball. You could say that's they're playing. They're not really. They're instinctively following patterns that they have been genetically bred in, or the golden, or the Labrador Retriever who doesn't want to go chase after the ball is not one that they're going to breed because he lacks the motivation to live into the name that he is. Ruby, our lab who died, she would have fetched a ball until she collapsed, because not because because she has no rational sense to say I've overdone it. It's an instinctual thing.
yeah.
So I would say that our capacity to play is the imago Dei in us that allows us to appreciate value, have an intrinsic, meaningful thing. Now, what you're talking about, both in the sense of sailing and in the sense of spectating of things like sailing, are what Score writes about in her original work, which is in 1992. She wrote something called The Overworked American, and I've never read it, but I remember from long ago. And the idea is that in the last century we've shifted from there was a balance to, you can go back to an agrarian society. There was a balance. You worked hard in the summer, you rested in the winter. I view my life that way. I probably work, in my average summer is 60, 70, probably 70, sometimes over 70 hours a week. In the winter, sometimes I'm 30 hours a week, and then the other 10 hours, sometimes I don't do anything. Sometimes I'm reading, sometimes I'm writing, other things. So that's the sense of balance. Whereas in America, again, when you have the goal in capitalism be money, or belongings even, which money we're able to purchase, there's no cap. You can always bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then and in order to have that biggering to happen, you have to be able to work. And so we basically, the argument that comes in this, in her original book is that we have displaced our sense of desire for stuff and power and things, and therefore we work because that is the means through which we can obtain those. But in doing so, we have placed a priority of stuff over and against the experiences of life often, or the value of relationships, and so, yeah.
I think it all boils down to pride.
Oh, yeah. And we're going to get into that. Hold on to that. You
Okay.
will say, if you want to say something about that.
No, I
but,
just think that's the root.
It is. Herman Melville said, whoever is not in the possession, and so this was her original argument was there was a decline in leisure. Now, what's interesting about that is I've often said that I think that the idea of leisure or recreation is something that also came about in the last century, that we have designed means and modes through which we can then recreate in a way that it's an experience as opposed to a regular part of our lifestyle. You go back to Laura and Mary, I just, whatever period of our world, there was more downtime in the winter and even in the evening, but I mean, like, you worked when you worked and you rested when you rest, but there was more time together. There was more inherent leisure time as opposed to constructed leisure time, which is what we often do. We have our weekends, we have our vacations, we've compartmentalized those things and I think that we here in Lake City probably live a little bit more balanced life in that regard. We hike regularly. I think we have found some of the balances of that living in the environment we do. It also helps that many of you are all retired, because then that begets more time to
Well, I like the way the Europeans take those 2 or 3 hour lunches. Just close the shop and go.
Yeah.
I mean, just America. Oh boy, they might lose $1. It's
Yeah,
just
but
crazy.
they stay open till midnight. then.
Well, but they also
Not where
but
we
they also
were.
work
They
35
go
hours.
till
They work
midnight.
less hours a week.
Yeah,
They
they
work
do.
they have a
So
very different
that's
philosophy.
what I'm
Oh, I've
thinking.
been to
So
Spain,
if you
yeah.
go to some countries
Is it
like
the,
Denmark and
French
stuff,
Spaniards
where
have
the
their lunch
average
at 2
work
and the French
week
Spaniards
is
at 4?
30
Oh, no, you guys are having two
hours.
different conversations here.
And then they're in the restaurants.
Sharon's saying something. Hold on a second, Roy. Sharon's in the middle
Where
saying
the
something.
average work week might only be 30 hours a week, and then you take 6 weeks off a year. Has anybody ever looked to see if there's a correlation to, do they spend less, they work less.
I'm sure
They
there is.
spend more time in leisure or in, personal time with
In general,
family and stuff.
Europeans are looked at as having a more balanced life than we. And I think COVID was a bit of a reset for that, because I think we're realizing, one, we waste a lot of time. We waste a lot of time in our work, in the work world. I mean, I don't know. I spent 2 years temping, and let me tell you, the business world, and going from legal offices to, like I worked at all sorts of different types of business offices, and there was all measure of wasted time. And that goes into a whole different topic of the relationship that we have. But what Herman Melville said was, whoever is not in the possession of leisure can hardly be said to possess freedom. And I think that harkens back to the idea of the Paradise Garden, that we're meant to walk in the cool of the evening. We're meant to have, those are I think, in the midst of labor that we have been given, because we are in flesh beings on this earth, and that's how we survive, that God doesn't desire, and the Sabbath is prime evidence of that, that God wants us to dwell and have a sense of balance. I think that our weekends are an attempt to that in some regard, and that's a fairly new thing as well. I think our vacations are as well, but I also think we sometimes, rather than living a equilibrium in our life throughout the year, we compartmentalize. It's Parker Palmer would have called it a hidden wholeness. That when you have that wholeness between your leisure and your work, and you're living a holistic life, you don't feel that fragmentation of, how many times vacations are often experiences too. How many of you need a vacation after a vacation? Because it's not really a vacation. It's an experience, and we should stop. It's not really rest; it's an experience. And again, then the desire for those experiences goes back to what Dopamine Nation is talking about: the wanting, the feeling. And what we're about to get into is the comparison side of that. Other people have that. I want that. That wanting leads us to pain. We seek out the pleasure, leads us back to pain. She says work is a necessity for the humanity's earthly condition. We have to work. Leisure is the dignity of humanity, and this is where I would say play comes into. I think that when the Holy Spirit came, games have blown up, just in terms of the way we express games, in terms of my hobby. Society has been around for thousands of years. Civilization has been around, but the amount of games that you have prior to Pentecost are minimal. My theory is that when the Pentecost came, our spirits were rejuvenated, and now 2,000 years later, we're seeing the results of innovation after innovation after innovation, the rejuvenation of play, the rejuvenation of connections. I think we see this in the creativity and innovation that we see in our technological world. That's a form of expression, of connections, of play, of having those things evolve. Now, you can say that comes out of work, but at the same time, there is a sense of the Spirit is present, so we're seeing this evolve in us now, and we're finding more sophisticated ways to deal with it. Her fundamental argument is that Americans spend money for prestige and status over quality. And she says it's competitive spending. And we, in other words, we try to compete with one another in our spending, and it differs from economic class.
Over prestige and status over what?
Quality.
But what she means by quality is not, I got fine Corinthian leather and she means quality of life.
Yes. Yes, to some extent.
Because prestige and status a lot of times is associated with finely crafted, high dollar quality things.
Yes, but that also comes from a more affluent perspective of
Well, no, you
social
get the full
class.
version.
What I'm saying is, yeah. So it goes back to, but you go into lower income brackets in our country, or into urban areas where there is less expendable income, the perception of having something that is valuable, even if it's not. So The idea I've often the idea of wearing a Rolex.
Mhm.
So if someone, so here's the notion: if a teenager has a Rolex on, do you assume that it's real or that it's fake?
You assume he's a drug dealer.
Either it's, but you probably, if you had to guess, yes, if it was an average teenager, Judah's walking around with a Rolex on his arm, you would assume that it's a fake Rolex because he's striving for the status of something like that. If someone who is a business person who looks like they have means and is wearing a nice suit is wearing a fake Rolex, would you ever question that it's a fake Rolex? Probably not. Therefore, the idea, and this is not downing on a Rolex.
Right.
This is the what this whole notion of competitive spending is. The idea of why would someone ever buy a fake Rolex, or why would everyone buy a fake Louis Vuitton or Gucci bag
Well, I
or
was
whatever
just
it
gonna
might
say,
be,
it's huge business.
is because they want to appear as if they are associating
Status.
with a
So,
status.
that's what she's saying. I mean, I'm gonna get the.
Yes,
read it.
you can.
Listen.
You're just welcome to borrow. There you go.
That's-
Um, we are called to share our possessions, Roy.
I know.
But I want it
It's
back.
hard to take on people.
But think about it, and when you think about it in terms of status, what that means, and you often say like Judah will spend, like there's this brand called Supreme, and I don't know why he spends money on it. Sweatshirts of Supreme, they pay outrageous amounts of money for this stuff, and it's a sweatshirt, but you're buying an association with a brand. And I went through this when I worked for the Ralph Lauren outlet. I had, I told you, I don't know if this is when I went to grad school, I had an apartment. I insured my wardrobe for $25,000 on my insurance on my renter policy, because I had a wardrobe of Ralph Lauren clothing that was worth. Now I didn't spend that, but I got 50% off. Plus, then there was another time, I was paying like a fraction of it.
It
But
was your prestige.
but
status.
that's exactly what it was. It was the association with the prestige of what Ralph Lauren was and the lifestyle, and that I wanted to be associated with, because it elevated my sense of self.
You're being
We-
prideful.
Well, we do this all over the place. We want to put it in the nature. And yeah, you could say, you know what, Ralph Lauren stuff was made well. And it's not made well now. But the old school stuff that I had before and the stuff that came from the actual stores is really made. But put it in the realm of that some of us would. Patagonia.
I thought my
Yeti.
clothes were bad.
How about Yeti coolers?
What's that brand?
How about
you see
the-
in the ski Arc'teryx?
I don't know. No, but whatever brand it is, Cody Paxi. I mean, like there are all these brands that are in our Patagonia, and now you know what? Patagonia is a phenomenal company. It, fair labor, high quality stuff. Everything about it is quality, but there's an association with it of status. And it's kind of why, when I was a kid, no one wanted to wear Lee's jeans. You had to wear Levi's jeans. They're both jeans.
Mhm.
They have stitching. They both have denim. They both were probably made in the same factory by this, by a person across the, unfortunately, but the association with these things. So that's ultimately what she's saying is within our culture, there is this competitive spending. And it is targeted. Well, that's what's going back to different classes. So you go into lower income racial ethnic communities, and you see people that have these cars that bounce up and down, or have these, and you can just tell they spend thousands of dollars on their cars. And you're like, what a waste of money. And we judge that. We're like, why would you put? Well, they are not in an income bracket where they can buy houses. So they spend the extra money they have to buy status, and so Judah does it with clothing. Next level, you do it with cars or the things that, stereos or things that are coming, big screen TVs, the things that are affordable. You get higher and higher, and then all of a sudden you're like, how big is your yacht? Oh, you have a 25-foot yacht? Well, that's not, and at what point do you stop? Elon Musk, he's the period.
Yeah,
The richest man in the world. You can't.
There's so much of that way before you get to Elon Musk, though.
But here's the
Or
interesting thing.
Bezos.
All of this is targeted toward middle class to upper middle class. Why? Because they're the class that has extra money and have consequences from the purchases of those money. Because there's a level of wealth that they can buy whatever they want and there's no consequence to it.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And so where you begin to have a consequence, if I spend this in a comparative spending,
Yeah.
but what I think the point that she's trying to make is you are spending, you're buying so that you can accomplish. There is an alternate, there's an extra motivation to a purchase or a type of purchase. The notion of the keeping up in Joneses, and there's a guy who uses this word, is called conspicuous consumption. And it's the idea that you purchase something to have an elevated status. And what's interesting about that is in the earliest 20th century, the notion of keeping up with the Joneses was an actual concept because you were literally just trying to keep up. It wasn't about bettering.
Just keep up.
It was keeping up. And what's interesting about that is you go into the 1950s and the middle class, as the middle class developed in our culture, there was a sense of keeping up with the neighbors. It wasn't doing better than the neighbors. It wasn't, understand, you're catching the difference, so
Yeah.
thinking, and why is because you didn't have social media, you didn't have television and advertising in the same way, you didn't have globalization. So those whom you were in relationship in your church, in your business world, in your local small community perhaps, or there was some sense of keeping an equilibrium. But after the 50s, something changed, and this notion of conspicuous consumption led to mass production and emulation, which what means in the 50s, as production, we talked about this over the last this whole thing, as production levels rose, people started consuming. But the emulation was to emulate your neighbor, keeping up with the Joneses. But in the 20 in the and the marketing and the retail industries were feeding and developing products that fit the middle class life. But something shifted from the 1950s, so basically our current day, where as globalization comes in and as social media comes in, as advertisement comes in, advertisement and marketing is geared towards those who are above most of our spending levels. Not to us. And one of the comments is there aren't that many, the number of millionaires in the world are a less than 1%. But marketing agencies gear what they're doing toward millionaires and the luxury lifestyles and the idealistic lifestyles. Why? Because we no longer are trying to emulate our neighbor to keep up with the Joneses. We're trying to emulate the rich and the class above, to elevate us above. So somewhere in the last 50 to 80 years, we've seen the society shift from let's just all sort of have equal stuff. We don't want to be left behind to I want to have more than you have. And we want to portray an elevated sense of self. And not only the production of stuff, but the banking industry has opened that door to give us credit to allow us to overspend that which we do not have in order to do so, which obviously has created problems. Glenda, solutions.
Marcia was saying that it comes down to greed, but it seems to me that part of it then comes down to attention. We need attention. Look at me. Look at what I have.
Yes.
I have more than the next guy. Why are we so starved for that kind of attention?
I think it's because we have a deficit in the real relationships that we have. And again, I think that we're probably better than that than here in Lake City. I think we're in a 400 person town. If you're living here, we're in greater, it's kind of like the movie they showed at the school, the Paradise Paradox thing. I don't think that really applies to us in the same way because we're such a small town. Not that there isn't facets of it that apply. In the same way, I think that if you're moving to a 400 person town in this remote part of the country, you're doing so with very intentionally for very good reasons, or maybe you're raised here, but you're staying here for very intentional good reasons. It's not an easy place to stay. You want to be here so we kind of have already combated some of this by choosing the fact that we don't have a Target 5 minutes down the road where we can just pick up whatever we want, and we do have to wait. Okay, I'm gonna just make a few more comments, but just look at the time. This goes really quickly. Income has increased since the early 2000s, but happiness appears to be on a decline. Loneliness is at an all-time high. Depression and anxiety are hot topics of the day. In other words, as we have seen the increase in income in our culture, in the increase in consumption of stuff, we've seen a decreased happiness. And so she focuses on three things for us, and then I'll leave you with two questions. One, focusing on community, relationships, and personal growth, which I think we're doing here to some extent. So I think that helps. We have a focus on community. We do have a focus on developing deeper relationships. And if we're Christians, we should always be focusing on some aspects of discipleship. So in our community, that probably is helpful. A minimalistic lifestyle. And that's what we'll look into next week. How do we get to that point of a more minimalistic lifestyle? How do we rid ourselves of that? But for her, the solution is, again, that's a kind of a fasting, to pull back, to reset that balance that the dopamine book is talking about. And the other thing she mentions is intentional communities. That when we live in intentional in communities, when we foster deeper relationships, we find more satisfaction from things that are real. And then when that pleasure comes from that, the pain that we feel when we're away from our friends drives us to them, as opposed to the pain we feel when our dopamine rush, fades from our recent purchase and we seek to have another purchase. So in some sense, it's kind of like what you invest your time into is what you're going to yield results from. And when we invest deeper into, this goes back to the notion, we were talking about intentional Christian community. You asked me about that. Like I would love, one of the things that I love about the Taizé community is, I know they do it 3 times in their monastic community. It's a different setup. So I'm not comparing apples and apples, but I love the fact that they prioritize a common experience of prayer every single day. And I firmly believe that if we as a faith community here said every day we're going to meet at noon and we're going to spend 30 minutes together, which is not or even 15 minutes together, let's just say 30 minutes together. There is no way that spending 365 days together when we're available in this town at that same time and what that means is, oh, it's 11:30. Do I really want to go? It's kind of inconvenient for me. No, I'm going to deny myself in favor of entering into prayer with my community of faith. We would see a radical transformation of who we are, because you can't be in community and that close to one another and maintain and engaged in that prayer. It's easy to be a spectator in there. But when you're engaged in prayer, when you're forced into that, and you choose that as an intentional part of your lifestyle, it reverses that trend, because what you're doing is you're replacing everything that our Western consumeristic marketing culture says is important with those things that God has given us that we really experience that sense of value and happiness from, which is the relationships.
So why don't we do that?
Because
Noon
we're
is a bad
addicted to
time.
dopamine.
Well, noon is a bad time
Well,
because if
how
you
would
go
you-
to
No,
John's-
yeah, we're not going to.
But at five every
Well,
day.
no,
I'm
you
just-
can't every day.
Well, I'm not.
You can
Let's,
get some more
we're not going to
bells,
work.
and you can
No.
ring the bells.
I don't wanna
every day at
workshop
noon,
it.
Call to prayer.
I'm just saying, as an example of a practice that draws us together, that is in an intentional way. It doesn't have to be that. I mean,
Well, the hiker center is kind of. I look forward to going to the hiker center and taking something down there and meeting and talking.
but that's 2 hours of your week. That's not. 2 hours
If
of
it
your
was
week.
15 minutes, it'd only be 2 hours of your week.
No, but I think it's the daily
It's the
consistency.
commitment
It's
every day.
it's very easy to take 2 hours of your week to go and hang out with some folks. It's very different to
Are
have
you
a discipline.
losing them because it says low battery?
It's okay.
You're
I'm going to
okay.
ask you, we're past time, and I'm going to ask you 2 questions. I'm not going to ask you to answer them, but I'm going to leave them with you. And these are 2 questions that I've sort of drawn from here.
I'll write them down.
You can take a picture of them if you can read my writing too.
Okay.
When we have prioritized our possessions over relationships, experiences, or when have we? That's not. It was making a statement. The question is for you: is when have we, or when have you, prioritized possessions over relationships, experiences, or other meaningful aspects of life? Again, this is not a question to answer, but it's just about doing a real sort of take stock of our lives. When have we said, okay, this is more important than that? Or when, and I would say extend that into this book, when have we prioritized our own dopamine hit over and against something more meaningful?
So is that a question in one of these books or something?
That's a question
you
from
synthesized out of it?
right there. That question essentially comes in the back of that book.
Okay.
Two, and this is something that I think that really is going to require some deeper thinking around, is when have we felt guilt for overspending, consuming, or differentiating ourselves over and against others? So this whole production process of spending, consuming, with this conspicuous consumption. And it doesn't even have to be the over and against someone stuff. That's kind of, I smushed two questions that she had in kind of together. But the idea of if we experience, this is kind of going back to you a little bit earlier when we were talking about Roy, and I know we're both being honest in this and we're just taking our two examples, but I think in a lot of times in our lives, we try to rationalize the spendings,
Yeah.
the
I think
overspendings,
of course.
and recognizing that desire to rationalize and understanding that is probably, if we are doing that, then we're trying to justify our prioritization of something earthly over something, higher.
Okay, say that last question one more time.
Well, just to consider when we have prioritized those things in our lives over, I don't even know what I said.
You said when have we felt guilt?
When have we felt guilt around the things that, when have we tried to rationalize something that we do? There are times that, we live here and I have a house down there, and I know that's, and it's my only house, that's where we earn our equity, whatever. But the amount of times I've tried to rationalize in my head that that's okay, or the amount of times I've tried to rationalize buying a new game. Do I need it? No. Is it going to change my life? No. I have 500 other games I can play. I don't need it as an experience. I don't need it. I want it. And then when I get it, I don't really feel satisfied by it. And I know that, but I still
That's
do
an
it.
easy question, actually.
Yeah, but I don't want you to answer it
Yeah.
right now because we're out of time.
Well,
Very easy
what would you classify? See, I wouldn't want a Corvette or buy a Corvette for the dopamine rush of that. If they're going fast in it, it's gonna give me some dopamine.
Well, I can find you a little Miata that'll do the same thing. That is a fraction of the cost.
Virtual.
I mean, you don't even need, all you need is a bicycle going down a hill or.
That's true.
A motorcycle
Oh, no, I know.
on any hill.
Or go to a
up
go to a
or down,
go-kart
and
place.
have a deer jump
Those
out
things
in
are-
front of you, and that'll give you an adrenaline
Oh,
rush.
boy.
All right. I know we didn't get into the techniques, and so basically, but
So what do we do with those two questions? Are we supposed to
they're
contemplate them?
just yeah. I mean, they're hard. They're questions for self-reflection because the question is where have I rationalized my? So in short, where have you rationalized your
Me
spending?
too.
Where have you rationalized your spending?
All the time.
I don't know if you can even read this, but
I don't know.
where have you rationalized your spending, and where have we prioritized our possessions over and against the relationships or the other things we're called
Oh, you're
to?
gonna send it to me? Thank you.
Where's the picture? Where's the?
And I'll stop there right there. I'm not gonna hang up on you like I did